Theresa Daniel. I'm your Dallas County Commissioner, and I recognize most of the people in there because we have already worked together or been together in a variety of ways. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Really need this? Well, I really
Yes, they
need
have to hear you online.
For the online.
Yes, ma'am. I will do this. What I'm going to do is, first I'm going to go through some of the just the background kinds of things, and then I'm going to go through the PowerPoint thing there. I'm from South Bend, Indiana. I was actually born in Michigan City, Indiana, but I moved there about 6 months, so I've been in South Bend most of my life. But let's start first of all with, many people don't have much of an idea what a county commissioner does. A county commissioner focuses in on public health, public safety. We run all the elections. We do roads, bridges, trails, and any other jobs as assigned. What that means, though, is that's working with Parkland, working with clinics, doing kids immunizations, the jail, and the county courts, and how that works together for public safety. We also set the tax rate. We adopt the county budget. We also appoint members of boards and commissions and oversee the management of Dallas County. So we rely on the 6,500 people who work for Dallas County to actually do the day-by-day work. That all kind of being said, as I said, I'm from northern Indiana. South Bend, over the time, even since I was born there, it's been about 100,000 people. So it's not a real large community, but it is a regional community. It is also the home of the University of Notre Dame and its sister school, St. Mary's College, where I graduated from. It is very diverse racially. And I grew up about a mile from downtown, like a mile between the University of Notre Dame and downtown South Bend, in a very eclectic neighborhood that had a lot of students there from all over the world. We had native Italians who took up and made their little colony there. We had Latinos, we had African Americans, and then, you know, my little family there. So it's a very diverse community. South Bend also has about 11.5% of its population from outside of the United States. And I'm not sure how that differs from the rest of the country, but seeing people of all nationalities and languages was something that was not uncommon. I mean, I grew up with it. That was just part of my life. I went to Catholic schools all the way through college, which was, I mean, that's the way it is sometimes. South Bend's a pretty Catholic community. Then I studied 4 years of Spanish and Italian in high school because my mother thought it'd be a fun thing to do. So you always do what your mom says, huh? My sophomore year, between my sophomore and junior year in high school, I went to Monterrey, Mexico. My mom said that I was the youngest, and my mom said everybody else got music lessons except for me. So she says, oh, well, I'm going to send you to Monterrey, Mexico for 6 weeks. So she put together her shekels to do that. Which is it's a broadening experience to first of all have, I think that was probably my second plane ride. And so it's, you know, you really, and first time kind of on my own without having mom or dad really close by. I attended St. Mary's College, Notre Dame, where we're 11.8%, or about 1,000 students were from outside. I also worked at the huddle at the University of Notre Dame since I was a sophomore in high school in order to raise money in order to go to college. I remember that conversation with my dad, and he says, well, you know, we believe in education, so you're on your own. But I mean, but that's okay, because we ended up graduating from St. Mary's, and in addition to working, I had received full scholarships to to academic scholarships to go there. While I was there, though, studied the sophomore year abroad, which was a Notre Dame program, and that was in Mexico City. And that, obviously, being immersed in an area that is not English speaking, has a lot of other customs than what South Bend, Indiana had. And there I also fell madly in love with a Mexican who did not speak English, which kind of furthered practicing. You know, they say practice, practice, practice. Well, I got that chance. But I did end up graduating from St. Mary's College in Spanish and Italian, and graduated as, I don't know if you've ever been in a college town where the people who live there are the townies. So I graduated from St. Mary's as a townie from the wrong side of the tracks. I mean, just because that's, you know, a lot of factors go into how those things happen. Right after that, I was dating a guy who studied French, and I was doing Spanish and Italian. So he decided that he was going to go into Peace Corps. And so he went to West Africa. I then went to Vista, but my trip was to South Texas, the Mexican border, Rio Grande City, which is in Starr County, Texas, which is, I mean, it's right there on the border. Some of the advantages of that is learning what's life on the border. You can go to lunch in Mexico. Definitely an influence. A lot of the student body in the schools there were from Mexico. And thus there was a pretty distinctive influence on life, on government, on the school district, having that kind of border contact. Also the fact of, even, you know, this was 1975, the amount of drugs that were coming across the border. You know, you always can say no, so it doesn't have to impact you, but you're very aware that there would be clients who came into Texas Rural Legal Aid, where I was a paralegal, wanting particular types of services. And it just, you know, the gold chains around their necks and things like that, you knew that chances were better that they were getting some of their income, at least, from drugs coming across the border. It's also Rio Grande City, the whole county only had 16,000 people. So you knew that, well, at least I knew, when I came into town, a single white woman, you know, 21 years of age, that there were people knocking at my door going, oh, well, welcome to town. So glad you're here. And then it really added to some of the unmarried young men also made sure that they, you know, oh, don't you want to go out to lunch? But it was, so it was a situation where it's very obvious that there was a change in town. I then moved to Harlingen for a year, still working for Texas Rural Legal Aid. But Harlingen obviously is a much larger community, and thus did not make such an impact. And it isn't so obvious either. You can hide a little bit more. One of the things that while I was there with Texas Rural was I started a paralegal training for the staff members of Texas Rural Legal Aid, which at that time covered like 11 counties in the South Texas area. So it's getting out and meeting people and listening and finding out, you know, how is Edinburgh different from Rio Grande City? Well, Starr County didn't have a hospital, for one thing, so any health care we had to go outside the county for. I mean, it's just realities of living where you are. The reason that I brought up starting that organization is because it also brought the legal aid groups from around the state together, because we would do trainings together. And that's how I met Michael Daniel, who was an attorney in Dallas at Dallas Legal Services. But doing that then caused me to move to Dallas, where Michael lived. Just a little bit about a quick thing on education. After I moved to Dallas, ended up getting a Master's of Science in Social Work and MSW, as well as a Master's in Urban Studies, and then a Master's in Public Administration, and then a few years later, the PhD in Public Policy and Public Administration. And all of those are really looking, all of those disciplines are really looking at how do we do business? How do cities work? How do communities work? And those are the kinds of studies that make you really keep your eyes open. What are we looking at? And then, you know, as you bring that information in, you add it to your store of information to be used on hopefully making better decisions, having a better understanding of what other people, what your constituents are going through. What do their problems mean to them? Not only your understanding, but how does that all fit together there? Now I just want to take a minute to talk about, as this little talk is the impact of travel on local governments. I've only been a few places, and I'm confident I'm not done yet, but I already mentioned that I spent almost a year in Mexico City as a sophomore in college, lived with a Mexican family who for the most part did not speak English. Our group from Notre Dame St. Mary's did a lot of traveling around Mexico during that time period. After graduation, I visited West Africa, Ghana and Togo, because one of the guys that I dated in college ended up going to the Peace Corps. Well, he went to the Peace Corps in France, but also knew that there were these, he went to the Peace Corps and ended up, he spoke French, but was in Togo. And Togo is a French-speaking colony. Ghana, right next door, which is where you've got to fly into, is a British-speaking colony. And one of the things that really struck me while I was there is that you could instantly tell that it was an American, African-American who was there. That it was just the way people walk, the way they dress. Even you didn't have to hear their language, and you could point out who were Native Africans and who were African Americans, which I always thought was incredibly mind-broadening, because we don't really think about how the life that we live may be perceived differently in other areas, because we don't have to. We are so insulated from almost anything here. I took a little trip to Spain. Having been a Spanish major in college, I always thought it was kind of sad that I'd never been to Spain. So finally made it there, but it was with a group of SMU students, and it was just, you know, I don't know, 12-day trip, but it was soaking up the culture that I'd only been able to read about at that point. And one of the things I would, traveling across the country, imagining Don Quixote walking in some of the same places, you know, the things that we read in school. And now you're actually seeing the kind of the scrubby plains that Don Quixote may have walked in. A few years later, I visited Italy with friends, and it was an Italian native and a guy who had been there many, many times. So we got to go where we wanted to go. It was educational in a different kind of way, but you know, always you got to eat the good food. And just, you know, enjoy the vistas that you're going to see, the street scenes that you're going to see that we don't get to see here. I mean, why else, to me, you know, why do you travel but to see something different? My most recent trip was to Ireland. And once again, it was with a group of SMU students, but it was from a particular class that was studying social justice. So in going to Ireland, they were in particular looking at what in Ireland is called the Troubles. And that's the period in their history where there was great civil unrest and violence in the streets. And so our trip, we stayed pretty much in the northern part of Ireland. but really talked to people and visited places where we could get a sense of what the political ramifications. What does it mean to have civil unrest? You know, I know we read that stuff in our history classes, and we all have a decent idea of our own American history. But at least to me, it's so far removed from everyday life. Well, to many of the people in Ireland, it's still very close to them because of their family involvement, their own involvement. But it also, going to Ireland made me very much aware that, and it was in Ireland that I got a couple of these, the poster up here, and then took a picture on the bottom here. But I don't usually think that any other place in the world had civil rights marches, but they did. And probably, you know, will continue to, but it's just our myopic view of the world. And being like, if you look at a map of the United States, Dallas is smack dab in the middle of this huge country where we do not have, you know, a foreign border. Shoot, the closest foreign border, Mexico, is how many miles away? 400, 450 miles away or something. So I brought this particular what is it, just fabric back, just to say, no, we're not the only place that it has experienced civil rights marches, that other places have too. And they may have done it with a lot of similar aspects about it, but chances are better that there were a lot of differences also. One of the other things on that trip to Ireland, I was very taken aback that Frederick Douglass was very evident. You know, most of us, you know, we know who Frederick Douglass was, but could we say very specifically what he was involved with and what his impact was and all that? You go around Ireland, and there was on the side of a building, someone had painted, you know, his face up there because of the impact that a lot of the people felt that Frederick Douglass had in their lives. I mean, could we say that? Yes, we could, but I think most of us would be a little pressed to say very specifically how and why, and, you know, what did he do, and what does that mean to me as a person? So that those two items, I was just a little, had to be reawakened, had to be reminded of things that you know, but you really don't have in the front of your head. And that is the role that, and a very recent role, that civil rights marches have had in other places around the world. The third thing I'd like to say about Ireland too is I have a grandmother, had a grandmother O'Donnell. All of my family is German except that side of the family, and she was a woman, she was, you know, about this tall, but she would just stamp her foot and say, "Don't you ever forget that I'm part of this family," to let people know that it was mostly Germans, but there was one Irish woman there, and she was committed to making sure that nobody forgot that she was there and that she was not German. But so going to Ireland, it was having to confront a lot of the myths and mythology that I think in the United States we've developed about Ireland. You know, we think of leprechauns and we think of finding the pot of gold and dancing the jig and, you know, the music and some of the stories. We don't even know our own history of Irish coming to the United States, to be perfectly honest. But we kind of go back to what I call the mythology of the Irish that we have in the United States. Incredibly beautiful place. In fact, all of these places that I've just mentioned, on traveling around the countries, just seeing just beautiful countryside, of seeing cities and towns that we probably would not see in the United States. So all that being said, what's the impact? What difference does any of this make? And that's where when I sat down and tried to think of some of this stuff, came up with a variety of answers. For example, an acceptance that other people may be more comfortable in a language other than English. And that's something that, in fact, we do confront here in Dallas County, because we try to provide our services at minimum in 2 languages, much of it in 3 languages, and some of it in, the 82 languages that are available for translation online. So we all know that being able, that language and the importance of language, it's huge in our lives. That first became aware to me when I was in Mexico City and walking around the streets, and knowing that I understood what people were saying, but my comfort level was nowhere near the comfort level of native speakers in their own country with their own customs. But that also brings on a little bit of an isolation. In traveling to Togo, Togo was a French colony, therefore the official language is French. French there has become quite a mixture of formal French, what people are taught, but also the native language kind of sneaks in. I don't know how often you'll be talking with somebody in either their language or your language, and they have some difficulty understanding it, and you'll go, yeah, but I mean, what's the word? What's the word for that? Oh, that's lemonade. And you go, oh yeah, that's right. That's what that is. But it's coming up with those exact words in order to communicate, that thought into someone else's head. So that kind of comes into, there's what I call the linguistical isolation, where you kind of get an idea what people are saying. You can navigate, you can find a bathroom or a restaurant, but there isn't that comfort level. Oh yeah, there's a post office right around the corner. I think I'll, take care of some business I have there on my way home. There is also a visible minority, and that is where, sorry, you can run, you can hide, but I'm sorry, it's out there. I remember walking in a couple of little towns in Togo along with the Peace Corps volunteers who were there, and anytime you went out on the streets, there'd be about a half a dozen little kids behind you, and they have a song there that they sing, kind of making fun of white-skinned people. And so you kind of got used to very lighthearted ridicule of, what do you think you're doing here? This is our country. This isn't your country, kind of a thing. But they would just, make fun of us as we walked along doing our business there. But it reminded you too, this is, well, because you couldn't hide. Any place I went, they knew I was a white woman. So you just kind of have to go with that. One of the other things is the being reminded of a lot of the history that we've read that took on new meaning, and the imperialism of Great Britain and of France in particular, because that's where I happen to be, but so much of Africa having been colonized. And seeing where the different cultures, the different language, the different way of doing business, most often kind of worked along the way it should have, but oftentimes you would see conflicts where somebody would be conducting business as they had been trained to do by the Anglo government. But you also could see that on the side they were dealing in the let's say just trading, which was something that they felt much more comfortable with because of actually, the practices in that particular little town. So that some of those highfalutin concepts took a very new reality, and the colonizing of Africa was one of the things that really stuck out. I had mentioned earlier about when you bring a single white female into a community, it makes a little bit of a splash. And when I went to Rio Grande City, it became very apparent. One of the things that also becomes apparent is South Bend is with the University of Notre Dame and with St. Mary's there. Catholic Church is real big. I mean, it's a huge impact there. In Rio Grande City, the Catholic Church was basically the only church in town too. But it was a much more conservative Catholic church than any that I had ever attended. So I think I went to church there a couple times, and even though I know that in order to be more accepted into the town, just the people, that I should go to church because that's what you do, right? And I just had such a, not aversion, but not particularly enjoying going to that church. And so would go to, other Catholic churches and other communities to take care of that little piece of business. But it just makes you stop and think once again that Rio Grande City and South Bend, Indiana have a lot of similarities, but they also have a lot of differences too. Bottom line on a lot of these things is that you learned that there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. And it doesn't mean some are right and some are wrong. It's just that there are different ways to do the same thing, different practices that communities have. But then I would say that understanding develops an appreciation for the complexities of the world. And I know that all of your jobs, you have meetings frequently. And in my experience, there's at least a half a dozen people around the table, because county government involves usually, a couple of cities and a couple of communities and a couple of nonprofits. And so you want to have everybody involved there. And what that means is, we have a lot of people getting together quite frequently, with each person bringing with them their own family background, their own experiences, their own interpretations, their own priorities. And even though we don't talk about it, sometimes you're very aware of it. Hopefully you're not, because that's what they call professionalism, when you can get the job done, even though you know that there are strong and sometimes very strong differences of opinion. Looking around the room, I mean, it's just, that's the nature of our business. That's what we do. Yeah, I've already said that. This also reminds us to understand where the constituents are coming from. We know where our biases are. Are there particular biases that either the other people at the meeting or in our constituents might be also? And maybe a little bit more understanding will allow us to, first of all, understand better, but second, hopefully get a better idea of, okay, how can we move this conversation forward to attain the goal that we want to attain? So what does all this mean? In looking through this, I have come up with first of all, just the phrase of learn all that you can learn. Any experience that you go to, sit down and learn. I remember going to my first job here in Dallas was, well, not actually my first job, but I was hired by Dallas ISD and to work with accountability in the school district. And I remember the day before I was going someplace and just thinking, I don't really want to take this job. I'm just not really interested. It just doesn't, but it would have been, a decent, clean inside work kind of job, and would use some of the background that I had. So I said, okay, I'm going to learn all that I can learn here. And I just started listing, learning how to work in a large public institution, learn about the students, learn about the courses they can take, learn about the different types of students there. Dallas ISD is a very large refugee population. Where are they? What are they doing? What are some of their challenges? And how can in my job in accountability and looking at programs that Dallas ISD would enlist in, how can I make that connection? And I did learn a lot from, education itself to, who are the educators? Who were my bosses and my supervisors? Where did they come from? What were some of their biases? And how did it all fit together? I did also kind of pick up at that time that if you stop learning, surely you've died, because there is no way that you can live in our society. I guess you could bury yourself, but if your eyes are even half open, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different kinds of attitudes and thoughts. So I came from an economically strapped background, but smart enough to get scholarships that's able to participate in privileged spaces, albeit as I was always the poor kid. My dad was not a professor at the University of Notre Dame, and they let you know constantly that you're from the other side. And all that can be applied. So it allowed the exposure to a bigger world with the nudging of my mother, making sure that it included travel to many places. All that can be applied so that I keep my eyes open, because it's a part of you. It's how you make decisions. It's how you react to people. It's how you walk into a room. And you've all walked into a room and you didn't know anybody there. So what do? You sit down, you take scope of what's going on. And then when you go to get a cup of coffee, you talk to the person next to you. And you start making those introductions so that when you leave that room, you at least know the names of a couple people, or know that they are in a departments on the 4th floor and you might be on the 5th floor, but one more person who's here. And also that allowed the exposure to the bigger world and all that can be applied, so that I keep my eyes open to details that enhance initial impressions, spur ideas of way to use resources to more creative ends, and to push projects forward. Because why are we here? What are we trying to do? We're trying to make things better, and we usually do that by pushing programs forward, by pushing relationships forward, by reaching out, by coming to sessions like these, just to listen to what else is going on. What are other people thinking? What are some of my colleagues thinking? How does all this fit together? In fact, when I kind of look back, every step of my life has contributed to where I am now. From being that waitress at the University of Notre Dame with its incredibly varied population, and the 5 years that I spent there just talking with people, listening to people, figuring out, what are some of the, I was just trying to remember what the ice cream drinks from other parts of the world are. And they're the same ingredients, but they're put together differently. Wasn't French cream. I can't remember what it was called, but we learned how to make all of those kinds of different drinks and ice cream things to, you know, because the students were lonely for home. But each one of the steps, from working at the University of Notre Dame to a solid educational background, learning a second language, being immersed in a tiny, poor Texas town on the Mexican border. You know, what does that mean? How does that influence an understanding of how do we do business? And some of those were business baldly put out because, I mean, they didn't have 1.7 million people to hide behind. But I did mostly work with public agencies or organizations. There was one private in the middle there, but I mean, public and private, that could be another little session too, is analyzing what are the differences and why doesn't the private market fit exactly onto a public organization. But I can almost guarantee you that it won't. But keeping your eyes open to use knowledge and past experience and understanding better the issues at hand and the cultural foundations, thus making better informed decisions. Just mention that word. I think this is the first time I've mentioned it, and that's the use of culture. I did a little bit of just looking, what does culture mean? It has a lot of different meanings in English. Some of them, weren't acculturation and looking at the background and beginnings of people is one part of it, but then there's also the culture in the bio sense of a culture, of creating a culture in a test tube kind of thing, which is a very different understanding what culture is. But understanding that culture, customary beliefs, shared attitudes and values, social practices, growing in a particular prepared medium, directs how we behave, what we do. Our own background, therefore, influences the decisions we make and the comparisons we make. Our families growing up, formal education, and what we learn through experience all add up to who we are. And in my case, that nudging of my mother to go see the world most certainly has influenced what I do as a commissioner. So I hope that I've talked a little bit about the impact of travel. We'll go very quickly through that. How much time is left?
20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Well, I'm sure there'll be some questions, so we got time.
Right. I got some good answers too. So this is the impact of travel on local governments. Okay, I mentioned a little bit of this before. What does a county commissioner do? You are probably aware that in Dallas County there are 4 commissioners and a county judge, and we all make up the commissioner's court. We meet on the first and third Tuesday of the month, and basically we set the tax rate, we adopt a budget, are the 2 primary things that, if you look by statute, that's what a county commissioner does. Then we appoint boards and committee members, and we basically oversee the governance of county government. And what you see right there is, this is District 1, and it's all of Garland. It is a piece of Mesquite is the green part. The peach colored is Balch Springs, and it's all of Balch Springs, and then a big chunk of the city of Dallas. And this is just a little bit about what could be said as an overview of the value of travel in leadership. And I've touched on a number of these of exposing leaders to diverse cultures and ideas. Being able to try to understand not only your own self and where you're coming from, but what are the biases of the person who you're talking with, so that you have a better understanding of how you can meet in the middle to achieve the goal that you're looking for. And part of it is kind of underlying all of this is keeping your eyes open. In here they use the phrase being open-minded also. because it's amazing the greater accomplishments you can reach by doing that. And you guys go, well, yeah, that's just basic knowledge, isn't it? Not everybody understands that. Might be some of the problems. But the bottom line on this is, to me, is saying that how our culture is the same, but then how our culture is different. What should we be paying attention to? And a couple of the things that are on here, the little picture on the lower right was in traveling in Milan, which it turned out that the two other people in the picture by the end of the trip were not speaking to each other. Which you kind of go, I'd go on a trip with either one of them in a New York minute, but that doesn't make any difference to anybody. But then the picture right next to that is NACO, the National Association of Counties. And I was elected in 2012, and since 2013, I think myself and the team we've gone to the annual meetings for NACO, because it's important to get out, to talk to people, and even talk to people who are doing the same things, so that you can have a better jumping off board, or at least have something more coming in, so that you can assess, make comparisons, and see, okay, are there better ways to be doing this? And in fact, we just came back from the NACO legislative meeting that's always in DC. And these other pictures here are on NACO, which is how nationally, that's how I guess traveled the most in the last 10, 12 years. Adams County, anybody know where Adams County is? Ta-da! Just outside of Denver. Yep. You get a prize. But the great advantage of going to NACO conferences is talking with people who do sometimes often the very same things we do, but very often in different ways. A lot of the statewide travel has been connected with visiting in the legislature, and that's what these pictures are from, which is the one is the state Senate. But it's working within the state of Texas to be more aware of the different worlds that are out there, but how we can use that knowledge to end up with better projects, better products. The next slide was, yeah, it's being a little goofy.
Yeah. It's
Okay, the next one is this one. So that first slide was with the statewide travel experiences and the international travel experiences of going to Milan, of really getting into and reading a lot about the culture of Ireland and how there are a lot of similarities and a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts that we come with. But then when it's sitting in front of you, recognizing that a lot of the nuances may not be there. The global adventures were unforgettable journeys, without a doubt. I thought it was interesting, the two flags that are so similar but so different countries. But then that's because it's Italy, Spain, Mexico, and Ireland are the four that are up here. And it's the cultures of Italy, the immersion in Spain's vibrant festivals, and Mexico City's rich history, and all the scenery of all of these countries. How it first of all deepens your appreciation for those countries, but then also you can't help but think, how is it similar to what I know? How is it different from what I know? Walking along streets and seeing practices of pedestrians having certain rules that they follow that we may not follow in the United States. It's just, I mean, you just begin to see some of those differences. But it's for me, but then it's always trying to figure out, okay, so what does that mean? Does it make it better or worse? Well, you probably don't need to go down there because it isn't so much the better or worseness of it, but do you attain your goal? Do you reach the end? Then there's the application to local government, which we're on, where travel enriches, I think, each one of us. And I'm looking around this room and knowing some of you better than others, I do know that we take all of our experiences, we take all of our background and all of the ways that we can pull ideas and maybe some ways of finishing up that particular project and making a good job out of it. It's also, I haven't talked an awful lot too about the people who you're talking with. And that is, we're always trying to encourage the input of people, the honest input, so that we can have a better idea of where we're headed, so that it matches up a little bit better with what we're trying to do. The last one is just challenges. And there are a few. Well, I hope that I've said a few things that have struck a note. Maybe a couple of things that said, oh yeah, I've felt that, but never really thought about it very much. But I think we're all richer people for being exposed and listening, keeping our eyes open and seeing how other people's experiences can help us do better, not only here, but you know, maybe I've never been to Idaho. I'd love to. Everyone says go to Idaho. So maybe that'll be the next trip. Questions, observations, values? Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. One, why did you decide to run for county commissioner?
Why did you decide to run for county commissioner? And have you had the opportunity to sit in on other governmental agencies in other countries, and how do they operate compared to how we operate here in America?
Can everybody hear me from here?
You can? Oh, sorry. I'll answer the second question first, because getting involved in other countries' governing bodies is a little bit more difficult than what I would like it to be, I guess. And so it's more, you know, listening to friends and people in the areas of their interpretation of what's going on. But then you once again, you put it back in your hopper and you go, well, how does that compare to, is it the same or different than what we've got? And I decided to run for county commissioner because actually I had run for office in 2002, and Dallas County was not ready for Democrats at that point. Everybody knows I'm a Democrat anyway, I can't hide it. But it was just that it seemed that there were things going on. The seat became open, and I said, I just went through, you know, okay, what does a county commissioner do? And I says, oh, I think I've got some familiarity with some of these topics, and so decided to put my hat in.
Thank you for the presentation, Commissioner. So for me, this is just a comment. I did identify with you talking about, you know, if you're speaking more than one language, there's certain times when you're talking and you're looking for the right descriptor. And then you'd be like, oh, so Lisa, what is this word? That really resonated with me because it's common that it happens to me. Because when you're talking, you're thinking in a different language, or you know, your dominant language or your mother tongue, and then you're talking to people, you know, speaking a different language.
Right.
So that was really touching.
Yeah. And having a very close relationship
Was in another language, was, you know, you're always bouncing back and forth, or at least that's what it felt like. Other questions?
Or anybody online. So there's a couple comments, people just thanking you and appreciating all that you do for the community. And yeah, I also just wanted to mention something you said about when in your travel, recognizing that there's different ways that people do, approach the same problems or address issues differently. And I think that's very insightful of you. And your travel is not, I mean, you didn't talk about traveling for a vacation or, to, just to have fun, but like actually to explore and learn about other cultures, right? So I think, because I'm just kind of thinking about the state of our world today. And I think there's a lot of folks that maybe travel and never leave a resort, and don't see how people live elsewhere. So they don't recognize the impact of decisions that are made, right? So I think that was a very insightful comment.
That's my dad. That was my dad who always said how important education was. Now go off and get it.
Great presentation. I really appreciate how you evolved and talked about all the different passions that you have. What's your current passion right now? What kind of gets you fueled up?
Jason talked a little bit about the private and the public, that kind of a thing. Because I guess it was my dad always sitting on my shoulder telling me that you have to, every event must be an educational experience. You always have to figure out what you're going to learn from anything. And I see Miss Medrano back there shaking her head too. Because because that was just the focus of, my parents were born in 1925, and World War II was when they came of adulthood. And it was just, that was the huge importance of education. And what does that mean to everything you do? That does not mean, though, I have spent my time on beaches and looking out over the water, and just because that's another piece of it. If you don't take advantage of it, also to experience it, ¿para qué? Why are you doing this? So you have to figure out where that balance is. But I'm always digging for why did this happen and how does that work, and those kinds of things, just because I guess I think those are fun too. Maybe. If there are no other questions, thank you very much.
I want to unmute themselves and ask a question.
Doesn't look like it. I would just like to leave with, if anyone has been around me at all, you know that I live by 2 rules. The first rule is that we do nothing by ourselves. And I think that this kind of presentation is a perfect example of all that you do in groups, and that all of the influences that you bring with you when you are in that group. Rule number 2, we're not done yet, folks. So I just thoroughly enjoy looking around this room, knowing that each one of you comes from a different part of Dallas County, but that we have a lot of commonalities in the respect that we want to see what's best for Dallas County and its residents, and we're going to do what we can do to achieve that. So let's keep learning, keep our eyes open, and keep adding to the way that we do business, but also the way that we have fun. Thank you.